Every person has only one life, and they want to live it brightly, full of impressions, and in such a way that they are remembered by their descendants. But how to do that? Become a great scientist, poet, or politician? But not every person has such talents. Or maybe they simply don't suspect their hidden potential, buried somewhere deep in the subconscious? So how do you awaken it then? Maybe try playing hide and seek with fate, each time tugging death by the mustache, as Kipling's Mowgli said. Well, how else can you find your place in this world? Do you want to learn about a person who, throughout his long life, tried many professions and went down in history as a great actor? About a man who was not only a witness, but a participant in the most important historical events, sometimes hanging by a thread from death? His fate is a script for an amazing show with thrilling adventures. You all know him well, and many of you, I'm sure, have seen him on screen more than once, as villains and as a great wizard, though not a kind one either. Have you guessed who I'm talking about? Of course, it's actor Christopher Lee. This name immediately brings associations with the image of Count Dracula, dark kings, and wizards. Or maybe some kind of psychological trauma affected the actor so much that most of his roles were connected with dark forces? Let's try to figure this out. And let's start, of course, with his childhood. Christopher Frank Carandini Lee was born on May 27, 1922, in a prestigious district of London. His father was an ordinary officer in the British Army, but his mother, a woman of extraordinary beauty, held the title of Countess and had deep aristocratic roots. She was born in Italy and had a beautiful expressive name, Estelle Marie Carandini di Sarzano. Her lineage was connected to Emperor Charlemagne, who founded the Carolingian dynasty. Among her maternal ancestors were Austrian and Italian aristocrats, as well as famous figures in the arts. Christopher Lee's grandmother, Estelle's mother, was a famous opera singer. By the way, if you look closely at portraits of Charlemagne and Christopher Lee, you can notice a surprising resemblance between them. The actor would later remind the world of his great relative, but how and when we'll find out a bit later. Interestingly, there was much mysterious in Christopher's life. For example, when he was little, his parents often attended social events and brought the children along. Once, at one of these gatherings, Christopher was introduced to the murderers of Grigory Rasputin, Prince Felix Yusupov, and Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich Romanov. Of course, as a small child, he didn't know who these people were, and that this meeting might have been a sign of things to come. All this would resurface many, many years later. Unfortunately, neither beauty nor aristocratic lineage helped his mother find happiness. Barely had Christopher turned 4 when Estelle Marie divorced her husband, the officer, took the children, Christopher and his older sister Cassandra, and moved to live in Switzerland. It was in this country that 9-year-old Christopher became interested in school plays, and despite his tall build and deep voice, he first received more comedic roles rather than sinister ones. But the most memorable was the role of a villain from the Brothers Grimm fairy tales. Interestingly, at school, Christopher wasn't known as a future actor, but as an outstanding athlete. He did fencing, played cricket, and even won school competitions. After some time, the family returned to England. Here, the mother of the future star remarried to banker Harcourt Rose, whose nephew was Ian Fleming, the literary father of James Bond, Agent 007. We'll recall this family connection again later. For now, it should be said that moving from country to country helped young Christopher learn foreign languages. By the time he came of age, the Englishman Lee was already fluent in French, German, and Italian. Young Christopher was passionate about literature, art, and history, but unfortunately, he was not strong in the exact sciences. So when he tried to enter Eton College near London, he failed the math exam. This meant he would be denied a scholarship, and the family didn't have money for tuition. Christopher was sent to Wellington College. It's one of the largest and most prestigious private schools in the UK. He passed the entrance tests for this school and received the opportunity to study on a scholarship. Since Christopher Lee studied classics at the college, a complex subject about ancient Greece and Rome, he had to learn dead languages as well, Latin and ancient Greek. Maybe that's why there were long-standing rumors that at some point the young man got into occult literature, though the actor himself always firmly denied this and even warned people to stay away from such dark arts. In addition to ancient Greek and Latin, during his studies, Lee became interested in Spanish and Russian, and even spoke them fairly well. It turns out that Christopher knew 8 languages. I think by now it's clear that there wasn't much time left for theater as a hobby. The only thing Christopher never gave up was sports. There was always an hour for fencing or cricket. Why did Christopher have to give up on entering Cambridge despite his brilliant academic prospects? What helped shape the unbreakable character that later became a hallmark of the actor? And what was the historical event he witnessed? That's what we'll tell you about now. Despite his noble origins, the Lee family soon faced financial difficulties. Things with his stepfather's business got worse and worse, and he had to declare bankruptcy. Constant nervous breakdowns and quarrels led Christopher's mother to another divorce. There was almost no money to live on. To help his family. In 1939, Christopher left his studies, despite his brilliant prospects, and went to France in search of work. But it was summer outside, hot. In France at that time, most employers were on vacation. Lee decided to first visit his sister, who was vacationing with friends on the Côte d'Azur. On the way, he stopped in Paris to see a close acquaintance of his stepfather, journalist Webb Miller, who invited him to take a walk around the outskirts of Paris. While in Versailles, Lee happened to glance into the courtyard of Saint-Pierre prison and became a witness to the last public execution. A German immigrant convicted of 6 murders was executed on the guillotine. This was the last open execution. Afterward, death sentences would be carried out without spectators, until they were completely abolished in France in 1981. The very process of the execution intrigued the 17-year-old boy. He even tried to move closer to the guillotine to get a better look and even soak his handkerchief in the blood of the executed man. But unfortunately, we'll never know if Christopher actually managed to do it. In general, Christopher Lee had a special interest in executions and executioners. Later, as an adult, he would invite some of these grim servants of the law to his home and talk with them at length, studying the details of their profession. He even befriended one well-known official British executioner who hanged nearly 200 war criminals sentenced to death after World War II. Christopher became a true expert, well-versed in the nuances of this specific line of work. And one of the factors that made the invitation to Hollywood especially appealing to him was the opportunity to personally witness an execution by electric chair, a spectacle available in the U.S., but that would come later. For now, Lee left Paris and went to the resort town of Menton. Since he spoke Russian well, he was warmly welcomed into a family of Russian immigrants. The atmosphere of this charming town captivated the young man, and he decided to stay. But let's not forget what time it was. The world stood on the brink of World War II, and Christopher and his sister returned to England, where he found work as a clerk. During this time, Christopher Lee happened to meet actor Conrad Veidt, his idol. Later, when Lee would be faced with choosing his life path, this meeting would play a decisive role. But how did the romantic and peace-loving Christopher Lee suddenly decide to become a soldier? What drove him to go to the front? When the Soviet-Finnish War began, to support his biological father, 17-year-old Christopher joined the front. He volunteered with British forces fighting on the Finnish side. In truth, he didn't see combat, couldn't ski, and had nothing against the Russians. It was simply that his family was in desperate need of money, and his clerk job paid poorly. So Lee tried to start a military career. But after 2 weeks, having stood guard far from the front lines, he returned home to his previous job, first as a clerk, then as a switchboard operator. Still, military service would eventually become a well-integrated part of Christopher Lee's biography. How did that happen? Why did the young man have to abandon his dream, and what pages of his life remain shrouded in mystery? Let's find out. The fire of war was spreading, engulfing more and more countries. The owner of the agency where Christopher worked left England in a hurry, and then Lee's father died of pneumonia. The young man decided to become a military pilot. The sky had long captivated him. It was his secret dream. But alas, that dream was not to come true. During the second-to-last training flight with an instructor, Lee began to suffer severe headaches. After examining him, a doctor diagnosed him with optic nerve damage. The eye injury had occurred during a fall down a staircase earlier in his service. The dream of becoming a pilot had to be abandoned. But Christopher did not refuse military service. His language skills, cool-headedness, and ability to quickly adapt in critical situations earned him a spot in the intelligence division of the Royal Air Force. There he was granted the rank of lieutenant. Very little is known about those years of his life, as Christopher never spoke about them, and military authorities are not known for disclosing state secrets or discussing the details of strategic operations. Nevertheless, it is known that Lee participated in campaigns in North Africa and Italy, and even witnessed the liberation of concentration camps. Indeed, the future Count Dracula's entire life seemed to walk a razor's edge, constantly balanced between life and death. But fate protected him. While still in the Air Force, the future actor narrowly escaped death under bombings several times, miraculously surviving. In 1943-44, during his service in North Africa, Christopher contracted malaria and suffered through it 6 times in a year. Twice, it was so severe he had to be hospitalized. And after one such hospitalization, when he was granted military leave, he traveled to Naples. There, with friends, he climbed Mount Vesuvius. Even then, the volcano seemed unusually hot. Imagine Christopher's shock when he learned that just 3 days after their climb, Vesuvius erupted again. A huge column of smoke and ash rose 10 kilometers into the sky, and streams of lava rushed down the slopes. It's terrifying to imagine what would have happened to anyone who had been on the volcano at that moment. After the war, a special unit was formed to hunt down war criminals and investigate crimes against humanity. There are documents confirming that Christopher Lee served in that unit, although he himself rarely spoke about it. An interesting fact, nearly 20 years after the war, Christopher went to another film audition. The director immediately dismissed him, thinking Lee didn't look like a soldier at all. Strange and funny, isn't it? But that would come later. For now, would young Christopher Lee continue a military career? What hidden talent would awaken in this man, and would he be able to reveal it? After the war, just over 24 years old, Christopher stood at a crossroads. He was still young, but he had no intention of remaining in the military. He remembered his father, a World War I hero, and didn't want to follow that same path. But Christopher had no university degree, only experience that was hard to apply in civilian life. He pondered his future. He was offered his old job back as a switchboard operator with a very decent salary. But Christopher longed for creative freedom, not boring, monotonous days. Teaching Latin at a local university didn't appeal to him either. At that time, the famous Swedish tenor Jussi Björling noted that Christopher had remarkable vocal ability. The future actor had a beautiful operatic voice. Jussi invited Lee to intern at the Royal Swedish Opera. Christopher was initially tempted, but then realized he couldn't afford to live in Sweden for such a long time. Like his dream of becoming a pilot, the dream of an opera career remained just that, a dream. So how exactly did Christopher Lee enter the world of cinema? What was at first holding him back and later, on the contrary, made him famous? Who pushed the young man toward yet another one of his dreams and helped him achieve it? Let's turn the next page in the biography of the great actor. One evening, Christopher's mother was visited by her cousin, Niccolo Garandini, who at that time was the Italian ambassador to the United Kingdom. So you can imagine the high-level connections Christopher Lee had, though he never bragged about them. During a family dinner, Niccolo suddenly suggested to his nephew that he try acting. Whether his uncle was joking or serious, Estelle, Lee's mother, was outraged. She absolutely did not want her beloved only son to have anything to do with the film industry, which in her opinion was unstable and dependent on others. But Christopher, suddenly remembering his youthful meeting with his idol, unexpectedly agreed, and Niccolo got to work. He had a good friend who was a lawyer, and at the same time headed a small local film studio. That's where the uncle brought his nephew, Lee. The moment the studio owner saw Christopher and sized up his looks, he suggested to the film producer, Joseph Schmidl, to sign a contract with him. But Schmidl did not share the enthusiasm about Lee's appearance, and at first refused to sign a contract. What scared the famous producer so much? You wouldn't believe it. It was Christopher's height. The thing is, Lee was very tall, 6 feet 5 inches, 195 centimeters, and at that time it was practically impossible to become an actor with such height. But Christopher not only did not give up on his dream, he took this as a challenge from fate and insisted. Schmidl eventually spoke a good word for Christopher, and the young man was accepted into the Rank Organization Film Company, signing a 7-year contract. Here we must note the persistence and determination with which Christopher Lee climbed to the peak of fame. For almost 10 years, he played supporting roles in little-known films. His mother suffered greatly for him and remained silent, hearing disapproving whispers from relatives who hinted that it was unacceptable for someone with such aristocratic roots to be a mere actor. Christopher himself paid no attention to the mockery. He studied at drama school, performed on the radio and in theater. What would become the next major turning point in Christopher Lee's life? Why would he call the next chapter of his life the cemetery era? As you may remember, Christopher had long been fascinated by the darker side of life, attending executions, communicating with executioners, or maybe he just got tired of playing ordinary, normal people in supporting roles and decided to try leading roles, even if they were monster roles. In the late 1950s, the actor began working with the London film studio Hammer, which mainly produced horror films. First, he starred in The Curse of Frankenstein and then became Dracula, playing the role 9 times. The vampire character in Gothic horror, what could be more cemetery era than that? It was the role of Dracula that brought Christopher Lee worldwide fame. The actor created an image of an irresistibly charming vampire. It should be said that incredible stories happened during filming. To look more believable, Christopher wore red contact lenses through which he could barely see. He bumped into equipment and sets, walked past other actors, and once even started talking to a wall, thinking it was one of the actresses. In one scene, when he threw the heroine into a pit, he slipped and fell on top of her. Luckily, no one was hurt. There was also a moment when Christopher, as Dracula, had to carry a girl on his arms across the room and lay her on the bed after biting her. But the scene just wouldn't work. The girl was quite heavy, and Lee got so tired that when he carried her to the bed again and dropped her, he immediately fell on top of her. Laughter broke out with jokes that although the movie was for adults, it wasn't about that. By the way, Christopher Lee also appeared in adult erotic films, but I'll tell you about that unpleasant moment later. So, Christopher Lee, an actor brilliantly playing villain roles. Although even here, light characters sometimes appear, the role of Sir Henry Baskerville and Sherlock Holmes. By the way, Christopher was perfect for the role of Holmes and his brother. The aristocratic features and manners instilled in him since childhood were impossible to miss. And what about the actor's personal life? Why did the future father-in-law require permission to marry from the King of Sweden himself? And why did the wedding never happen? In the late 1950s, Christopher met a lovely girl named Henrietta. A romance blossomed, which was supposed to end in marriage. The couple had already announced their engagement. But Henrietta's father, the influential Count Fritz von Rosen, was against the marriage. He couldn't allow his beloved daughter to marry a plain actor, wanting to catch his future son-in-law in something unworthy. The Count hired private detectives. When the detectives found nothing bad about Christopher's behavior, Rosen demanded recommendations from influential people and a blessing from the King of Sweden himself. Lee calmly fulfilled all the bride's father's demands, even bringing a blessing from the monarch. The king personally knew Christopher because he often attended the filming of his movies. But the wedding still never took place. When the Count calmed down and set a wedding date, Christopher himself broke off the engagement. The young man decided he couldn't provide a worthy future for his wife. After all, she was from a wealthy family and was quite spoiled by luxury and attention. Meanwhile, his financial situation was still unstable. He was a little-known actor who could lose work at any moment. The actor never regretted that decision. Very soon, he married Brigitte Kronk, who was a Danish model and actress. Brigitte became Christopher's only love. They lived together for more than 50 years, raising their only daughter, Christina Erica Lee. How did the past remind itself again, and how did Christopher become a rival of James Bond? So the actor's career began to confidently grow. One of Lee's most famous roles, which the actor himself considered one of his best, was the role of Grigory Rasputin. Remember the childhood meeting with Yusupov? How could you not believe it was a sign? By the way, Rasputin's daughter Maria once told the actor that he really did look very much like her father in that film. No, not in figure or height. Grigory was much shorter, but in the crazy look and the overall impression. And do you remember the nephew of Christopher's mother's second husband, practically a relative? That was Ian Fleming, the author of the James Bond books. Christopher was always friends with him. Once, when they met, the writer suddenly noticed that Lee could wonderfully play both Agent 007 himself and his main enemy. Unfortunately, Ian reminded the producers too late, and Christopher only appeared in the 9th Bond film. And, of course, as the villain, James Bond's rival, well, at least not a vampire or a zombie. The actor portrayed, in his usual style, a surprisingly charming gangster with various technical gadgets, even evoking some sympathy. But Christopher was not always a villain. In 1998, the film Jinnah was released, in which Lee played the Pakistani politician and father of the nation, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. The actor considered this role one of the most important in his life, although it somewhat faded compared to his fantasy genre heroes. One could talk endlessly about the great actor's film roles, although among all the roles there was one Christopher Lee very much disliked talking about. Yes, that's right, it was a role in a porn film. No, he did not enter this industry because he needed money. His aristocratic upbringing would never have allowed him to do that. Christopher Lee appeared in adult films by mistake, accidentally. The actor flew to Spain for one day at the request of his friend Harry Towers, confident that he was filming a scene about the Marquis de Sade. Christopher quickly and well played his part, and suddenly, as he was leaving, noticed that indecent scenes had already begun. Lee was furious because no one told him the true nature of the film. The actor never took such roles again. Did you know that Christopher Lee was in the Guinness Book of Records 4 times? The first time as the actor most frequently mentioned in film credits during his lifetime. The second time for the record number of deaths of his characters. They were burned, hanged, shot, thrown out of windows, and even struck by lightning. The third time for the highest number of sword fights, including various types of rapiers, foils, laser swords from Star Wars, and even billiard cues. Lee took part in 17 such duels. It should be said that Christopher Lee was excellent with all kinds of this weapon and always used real blades, not props. He even said that he only got injured during fight scenes with other actors. Professional stuntmen never caused anyone harm. In 2008, Christopher Lee was recognized as the most sociable actor in the world. Processing data from more than 1 million actors, a computer determined that no one had as many acquaintances as Christopher Lee. And he also became the oldest artist to voice a video game character. Aren't you tired of such an eventful biography of an ordinary man? But that's not all. Did you know Christopher Lee loved The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, often rereading them? And that he once met Tolkien. Yes, the actor accidentally met the writer in a pub. Christopher was so nervous he could hardly say a word at first, then amazed Tolkien with his love for his work. As they were parting, the writer said that if a film were ever made based on his works, he would be glad to see Lee in the role of Gandalf. Alas, that role went to another actor, because the role of the Grey Wizard was physically demanding for the aging Christopher, and he was given the role of Saruman instead. It should be added that during the filming of the White Wizard's murder, Lee even advised Peter Jackson on what sound people make when dying from a knife in the back. As an old soldier who had been through war, Christopher remembered this well. After the release of The Lord of the Rings, the elderly actor gained young fans, and Christopher decided to republish his memoir, Tall, Dark, and Terrible, from 1977. In 2003, the book Lord of Misrule was published, already, as we can see, with a more modern title. The success of Saruman was obvious, and Christopher Lee was offered the role of another criminal, though this time from outer space. Lee became Count Dooku in Star Wars. This role helped the actor achieve financial security in his old age and the ability to relax peacefully. But could a man like Christopher Lee enjoy a quiet, measured life? Of course not. Grand plans still awaited him. In 2009, at Buckingham Palace, at a ceremony led by Prince Charles, 87-year-old Christopher Lee was knighted. The actor received the Royal Order of St. John and the title of Sir. Respecting his age and achievements, Christopher Lee was allowed not to kneel before the prince. Would you have the courage, after 80 years of life, to suddenly change your image and try to fulfill a youthful dream? I understand many would shrug and say, "Oh, just to live to that age, and then lie quietly in a hammock somewhere under palm trees and enjoy the sound of the surf." Christopher Lee decided to enjoy the sound of rock music. Yes, you heard right, rock music. The actor wanted to reveal his vocal talent to the whole world, and in 1996 he released a music collection with country ballads and opera arias. It even included the famous Song of the Flea by Modest Mussorgsky, which Lee performed in Russian. 10 years later, a similar album was released, adding Christmas hits. But then Christopher's musical tastes suddenly changed. After meeting Italian metal musicians, the actor felt an irresistible pull to this musical style. He took part in recordings of several heavy metal albums with famous performers. And here we have to return to Christopher Lee's lineage. In 2010, the actor immortalized the memory of a distant ancestor and released a conceptual album dedicated to Charlemagne. This album, in the symphonic metal style, was created with the participation of a 100-piece symphony orchestra and the rock bands Manowar and Rhapsody of Fire. The mystical transformation happened not only in film but also in music. Lee became King Charlemagne, telling the world his story. In the music videos, the actor sat on a throne wearing a crown and a robe, just like a proper king. Christopher Lee's talent as an opera singer and actor left no one indifferent. And at that time, the actor was already 88 years old. In 2013, the actor re-recorded the songs from this album, but with different musical accompaniment in the heavy metal style. Besides performing music, Christopher also narrated texts for the Tolkien Symphony Orchestra. How much more could this simple great man have done for art? But on June 7th, 2015, he passed away. Christopher Lee was approaching 94 years old. It's hard to convey the full weight of this loss. The world lost a true genius, a great singer and musician, an unmatched actor, a person with incredible talent. His contribution to world cinema and music is hard to overestimate. Christopher Lee acted in 259 films and was the oldest rock musician. In 2011, for his enormous contribution to cinema, the actor received a BAFTA award. This is the British Academy of Film and Television Arts Award. If you analyze his filmography, more than 80% of Christopher Lee's roles were villains. But in reality, in life, the actor was a true gentleman with aristocratic upbringing, kind and open-hearted. All his acquaintances and friends admired him not only after his death, as often happens in history, but also during his lifetime. Fans of Christopher Lee can be found in every corner of our planet. Once, the great boxer Muhammad Ali declared in Manila in 1975, "I dedicate this fight to Christopher Lee." When journalists asked the actor how this was even possible, he smiled and answered, "Black magic," adding even more mystery to his biography. That's how amazingly great Christopher Lee turned out to be. A nobleman, a soldier, a great husband, a good father, and just an ordinary man. His name will be hard to forget, just like the characters he created.